Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride. We unfortunately have no guests tonight, so it is just me, but hopefully we'll get through it. So first of all, unsurprisingly, our first story is Brexit again. The Scottish Government has published details of its new measures being put in place to mitigate a no-deal Brexit. This overview document outlines the depth and scope of work underway, suggests what action the UK government should take, and sets out the challenges Scotland may nevertheless face in the event of a no deal on the 31st of October. It details steps to protect food and medicine supplies, support businesses, and safeguard vulnerable citizens. Specific initiatives have included the establishment of a Scottish Medicines Shortage Response Group and a commitment to create a £7 million Rapid Poverty Mitigation Fund in the event of a no deal. Plans have also been prepared for the old port in Stranraer to be used to hold up to 300 HGVs if traffic flows between the north of Ireland and Scotland increase. Farmers and crofters are receiving 95% of their Common Agricultural Policy payments early to shield them from the immediate effects of a no deal, and consideration is also being given to increasing Marine Scotland's surveillance capabilities. The report is also quite strong in its, particularly in its preamble, on the difficulties that the Scottish Government has been caused by the Westminster Government. And I just want to dig into these a wee bit because I think they are quite interesting. So this proposal, if I can just find the space, I'm sorry. This is in paragraph 12 of the report. While there have been some examples of an effective approach to joint working, in general, the approach of the UK government has been to actively limit the analysis shared with us, to exclude the Scottish Government from decision-making, and to fail to share with us its own plans for actions to mitigate no deal. The quality of engagement has deteriorated since the appointment of the current government in July. For example, we have not seen a version of the Yellowhammer planning assumptions, which are critical to our planning work, since early August. And then in the next paragraph, paragraph 13, prior to May, Scottish Government's ministers and officials were routinely invited to relevant meetings of the UK Government's European Union Exit Trade Preparedness Committee. These arrangements were far from perfect, but provided some basis for sustained engagement with the work of the UK Government. However, the arrangements established by the new administration are much weaker. Scottish ministers have been invited to only 8 out of over 50 meetings of the new EXO committee. It limits the ability of both the Scottish and UK governments to plan mitigations that will be as effective as possible in the event of no deal, and to ensure concerns in Scotland are properly understood by UK ministers. So that's fairly damning words, I think, given that even during the Theresa May administration, the Scottish Government complained often that it wasn't being heard, that communication between Westminster, or rather between Whitehall and Holyrood, was not where it needed to be. But it does seem that the Boris Johnson administration has become significantly worse. The actual arrangements, the whole document is 30 pages. It is quite dense, and we won't go into all of it. But it does include a variety of information around medicines, food, how businesses are expected to prepare. And I would just like to highlight one small part about EU nationals living in Scotland, which has been something of a topic of interest for us here. So the Scottish Government, it says, is making every effort to ensure EU citizens feel welcome and valued. We have established Stay in Scotland, our dedicated communications campaign, to encourage EU citizens to take the necessary steps to ensure their settled status in the UK. We also continue to underline Scotland's commitment to Europe and positive international relations through our Scotland is Open marketing initiative. The Scottish Government is taking a cost-effective, targeted approach and making use of digital media channels or direct communications wherever possible. And that does sound nice, and we have heard many EU citizens commenting how warm the Scottish Government's language has been and how welcome that is in contrast to what they've heard from down south. But at the same time, I know that EU Citizens for an Independent Scotland, amongst others, have been campaigning very hard to encourage the Scottish Government to actually do more. there has been a sense among some EU citizens that the Scottish Government is full of warm words, but is not necessarily taking very many concrete actions to support them, and we would definitely encourage the Scottish Government to do that. Meanwhile, campaigners were again in court today at the Court of Session. This is in response to the decision yesterday to dismiss the appeal to the Court of Session to use what's called the nobile officium powers to essentially write the letter for Boris Johnson if he refuses to write the letter requesting an extension that was required by what's called the Benn Act. This legislation, technically called the European Union Withdrawal No. 2 Act, requires Johnson to write to the EU asking for an extension until the 31st of January if he fails to get a deal agreed at Westminster by the 19th of October. Lawyers for the UK government said on Friday for the first time that Boris Johnson had accepted that he would have to send the letter and he couldn't frustrate that request by asking EU member states to refuse it. So Aidan O'Neill, QC for the petitioners, told Lord Carloway, Lord Drummond and Lord Brodie, who are the judges hearing the case, that sending a letter on behalf of the Prime Minister was unprecedented, but that these are unprecedented times. Lord Carloway said they would give a decision at 11 a.m. on Wednesday, but hinted strongly that they could suspend the hearing until the 21st of October to ensure that the court could very quickly take action to ensure that the Act was observed. David Johnson, QC, acting for the UK government, told the court that the Prime Minister accepted that he would face legal sanctions if he broke the law, saying, "I would have to accept that the court will be able to deal with that one way or another." He did say that the nobile officium powers were not suitable or justified, and that anti-Brexit campaigners should instead seek a judicial review, but only after the Benn Act deadline has passed, which obviously, in such a time-constrained issue, would pose significant problems, where the case would have to be heard, probably appealed, and all in an exceptionally short period of time before the 31st of October. So we will keep an eye on this one. As I say, the results of that case should be heard tomorrow, and we will hopefully have some clearer vision of what to do then. Of course, today we did also hear that Parliament has been prorogued until next week, so at least Parliament can do very little to force the Prime Minister's hand at this stage. It will now be into next week when we hear the Queen's speech, and the results of that, we may then have to move into further court proceedings, further parliamentary proceedings. All sorts of chaos may emerge as that process keeps on developing. We will, of course, keep you up to date with all the latest developments as they come in. Meanwhile, the European Union accused Britain of playing a stupid blame game over Brexit today after a Downing Street source said that a deal was essentially impossible because German Chancellor Angela Merkel had made unacceptable demands. In a sign that Johnson's last-stage proposals to bridge the Brexit impasse have failed, a Downing Street source said Merkel and Johnson spoke on Tuesday and she made clear that a deal was overwhelmingly unlikely. The Downing Street source said that if Merkel's position on Northern Ireland remaining in the EU's customs union was the bloc's position, then a deal was impossible. If this represents a new established position, then it means a deal is essentially impossible, not just now, but ever. A spokesman for the German Chancellor confirmed that the call had taken place, but declined to comment further. Meanwhile, the EU, other people within the EU, rather, were scathing about this. Donald Tusk, the European Council President, tweeted out, "Boris Johnson, what's at stake is not winning some stupid blame game. At stake is the future of Europe and the UK, as well as the security and interests of our people. You don't want a deal, you don't want an extension, you don't want to revoke. Quo vadis," which, of course, is Latin for "where are you going?" So this is a significant problem. The language, of course, being ramped up on both sides. The Conservatives again, or rather Boris Johnson's office at least, again saying that anything that involves Ireland being harmonised with the EU, which it would require to be in order to maintain an open border in the north of Ireland, is something that the British government seems to be just wholeheartedly unwilling to accept. And that does presumably mean that a deal would be impossible. And I would stress, of course, the EU has gone to significant lengths to help Britain find some solution. This was the backstop that we have in place, that's in the deal that Theresa May agreed, is what the UK had asked for as a concession. The EU had originally wanted a customs border to go down the Irish Sea to essentially keep Northern Ireland as just a special case that would kind of be appended on to the EU via its relationship with Ireland. And checks would then exist between Ireland, the island of Ireland, and the island of Britain. Sadly, that doesn't seem to be something that the UK is willing to accept. So a whole UK backstop was introduced, and now the UK is saying that that is not acceptable. The EU, of course, speaks with one voice on this. Angela Merkel's voice is not massively more powerful than any other in the EU on this particular issue, and indeed the Irish government is perhaps the most important voice in this issue. And unsurprisingly, the EU has shown absolute solidarity with a state which has chosen to remain a member, has been an enthusiastic and positive member throughout its time, and is instead now looking at Britain as something of a wrecker of trying to damage Ireland, damage the EU, damage itself, and damage, above all, the Good Friday Agreement with its behaviour. Meanwhile, there are several other people have commented on this number 10 briefing. The Brexit Party leader, Nigel Farage, said that the UK now had a choice between a clean break Brexit or to stay in a new militarised empire. That is some fairly dark language, I feel. I think Britain, honestly, complaining about being part of a militarised empire is at least ironic, if not wildly hypocritical. The Green Party's Caroline Lucas described the government's position as close to blackmail as it gets, after implying that the UK might withhold security cooperation from EU countries that backed an extension. And the Northern Ireland Secretary, interestingly, Julian Smith, issued more of a dissenting line, saying that any threat on withdrawing security cooperation with Ireland is unacceptable. So even within Boris Johnson's own cabinet, which is, as we know, about as strongly leave and as strongly no-deal leave as any cabinet is likely to ever be, there is still dissent from the Northern Ireland Secretary, who presumably has read his brief and knows what a damage that would be. Meanwhile, the SNP commented. Stephen Gethins, the Europe and Foreign Affairs spokesperson at Westminster, said the reported comments by Angela Merkel confirm what we already knew to be true. Boris Johnson's unworkable deal was designed to fail from the start in order to push Scotland and the UK closer to a devastating no-deal crash-out. This is the latest deceitful move by Boris Johnson to shift the blame to European partners, and it will not work. His take-it-or-leave-it approach is threatening our economy, public services, and risking 100,000 Scottish jobs. With time running out and his deal as it stands rejected by the EU, Boris Johnson must seek an extension to the October Brexit deadline, as the law requires him to do. In Westminster, it is vital that opposition parties move to swiftly bring this Tory government down, secure an extension, and call an election. They must put their party interests to the side and act in the national interest. And of course, the issue that is going to arise now, of course, is that with Parliament prorogued, the next thing we'll hear in Parliament will be a Queen's speech. It seems very likely that Boris Johnson will lose that Queen's speech vote because obviously all the opposition parties will oppose it, and very likely some of his own defectors will oppose it as well on the grounds that they oppose no deal, which may well be a part of the Queen's speech. So we will then have to look at what happens if the government falls, is there going to be a new government able to take their place, presumably led by somebody from the opposition benches, although we've talked about this at length. The Lib Dems don't want to have Jeremy Corbyn in charge. Probably some of the Labour Party don't even want Jeremy Corbyn in charge. And certainly some of the Tory defectors don't want Jeremy Corbyn in charge. So there is going to be a bit of cat herding, I imagine, in Westminster over the next week or two to try and figure out what could happen. It does seem surprising that the leader of the opposition, the leader of the largest opposition party, would be denied the opportunity to form a government in that situation simply because the Lib Dems don't like him very much. Even the SNP has said that they will work with Corbyn. So we will have to see what happens in that situation. We would of course hope that Corbyn can bring that together, but as somebody who has struggled to lead his own party, it does, and somebody who has struggled to express a clear policy on Brexit, it does seem that there is going to be quite a lot of wrangling to go on before we finally see any resolution to this situation. And just finally, echoing what we were saying earlier, Patrick Harvey said today that EU citizens Scotland need more certainty. Patrick Harvey said, these EU citizens who are already here, whose lives have been subject to such uncertainty and anxiety, I think frankly their contribution to our society has been demeaned by the UK government and those seeking to end freedom of movement. If no deal at the end of October can be prevented, which of course it should be, their lives will still be facing the prospect of future vulnerability, not least if a future general election leads to a Conservative government whose central mission is to throw those people's lives under a bus in a brutal no-deal Brexit to come. Surely the impact of the current situation on their emotional and mental well-being is up there with what else the brutal, hostile environment has inflicted on anyone. And we would strongly agree with most of what Patrick has said. There is a brutal experience, and it has been for 3 years now for EU citizens living in Scotland, and we would call on all governments to do everything that they can to make life easier for those people. In other news, again still on Brexit, UK fishing exports could be halted within 48 hours of no deal. Representatives of the fishing industry said it was a bit of an understatement to describe the UK's preparations for no deals as a shambles. Not only is the country not ready, but there are not enough vets to stamp paperwork on every boatload of fish, which would be mandatory in a no-deal scenario. Terry Portman, a marine consultant, said, you could realistically be looking at the UK fishing fleet, certainly the fleet that's catching exportable products, tied up within 48 hours of a no-deal Brexit. If trucks carrying perishable goods were caught up in queues at Dover, this would have a knock-on effect at the daily fish auctions, with hauliers unable to pick up loads, she said. Would it not be an irony that the UK fishing fleet, who loyally, almost unanimously voted for Brexit, got tied up because the government didn't help and intervene to make sure the experts they so heavily rely on could continue? So yeah, this is obviously a significant challenge if there's holds-ups at borders with inspections of especially food products. This will be a significant problem for many of our exporters, although I would slightly dispute what this consultant had to say. Yes, in large part the fishing fleet around the UK did vote to leave, but there are significant parts of the fishing fleet in Scotland that are strongly remain for precisely this reason, especially on the west coast. A lot of their exports go to Spain and other parts of Europe, and they have said consistently that they need full single market access and frictionless trade. Scotland's salmon industry as well is a very significant does very significant trade in Europe. It's the North Sea fleet has been fairly pro-Brexit, although even that has been somewhat tempered in recent months as they started to realise just how serious the no-deal withdrawal could be. So again, we will keep an eye on this. The fishing industry, while small, is very important. We are an island nation after all, and we will we will have to wait and see just how significant that problem can become. We will move on, though. There are other things happening around the world. And in the Middle East, Turkey is expected to press ahead with an attack on Kurdish-led forces in Syria. Now, those Kurdish forces are officially backed by the US, and therefore this does pose some problems between countries, Turkey and the US, which are at least nominally allies. Turkey has signalled its intent to press ahead with an attack on US-backed Kurdish-led forces in northeast Syria, despite confusion over US policy after officials appeared to backtrack on Donald Trump's decision to withdraw troops from the area. The Vice President Fuat Oktay said Turkey would execute its own plans regarding national security and would not be controlled by threats. He was at a university ceremony in Ankara where he said Turkey will not accept a terror corridor or terror state right next to its borders under any circumstances, whatever the cost. The Trump administration appeared to step back from the president's reported promise to his Turkish counterpart Erdogan in a phone call on Sunday that he would withdraw US troops from Syria's northeast. The decision appeared to clear the way for a Turkish assault on the Kurdish-led Syrian forces, Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF, which the US has backed, but Ankara considers an extension of the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK. After the White House announced on Sunday that the Turkish offensive was imminent and that US forces would be moved out of the way, Trump was heavily criticised by both Democrats and Republicans, including close allies such as the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Critics warned that a rushed withdrawal could open a new front in Syria's complex war, undo the gains made against Islamic State, and betray a military partner that had lost 11,000 fighters in that campaign. And that is worth remembering that the Kurdish fighters in the SDF have been amongst the most valuable and most successful in that battle against Islamic State in Iraq and in Syria. They have, as this report says, lost 11,000 fighters, but they have, in general, been successful, have held their ground, and have been stalwart allies to those who have been making that assault on Islamic State. We of course know that the Kurds are a stateless people, and that puts them in continuous problems in this part of the world. They're not welcome in Syria. They're not welcome in Turkey. They were not welcome in Iraq. They have been under continual attack from governments in all three of those countries for many, many years. They thought they had found a secure ally in the US and that would provide them with protection, particularly as they were fighting a common enemy. But in this case, Turkey, of course, is something of a closer ally to the US. And it does appear that the US is willing to allow this attack on the Kurds to take place. So we will see what happens. There does seem to be some uncertainty about it at the moment. We know that Erdogan is due to meet with Trump in the US very soon. So presumably this will be on the agenda, and we will, again, keep you up to date. Moving on again, still with Trump, unfortunately. Donald Trump says that he blocked an ambassador's testimony to Congress and attacked what he called the kangaroo court. Donald Trump said that he prevented the US ambassador to the European Union, Gordon Sondland, from testifying to congressional impeachment hearings, calling them a kangaroo court. Democrats leading the impeachment investigation said Sondland's lawyers were called by a State Department official after midnight, leaving a voicemail message ordering him not to attend Tuesday's hearings. The late-night call came after Sondland handed over WhatsApp messages and other communications from his personal devices to the State Department, which was refusing to provide them to the House committees holding the impeachment hearings. Ambassador Sondland's testimony and documents are vital, and that is precisely why the administration is now blocking his testimony and withholding his documents, the chairs of the House Intelligence, Oversight and Foreign Affairs Committees said in a written statement. We consider this interference to be an obstruction of the impeachment inquiry, the statement said, adding that the committees would be issuing subpoenas to Sondland for his testimony and his documents. He had agreed to testify voluntarily on his communications with Ukrainian officials, US diplomats, the president, and the president's lawyer, about the phone call on 25th of July with the Ukrainian president, which is the subject of much of this impeachment inquiry. At issue is the question of whether Trump abused his office by using its power to his own political advantage by pushing a Ukrainian investigation of Joe Biden, who at the moment is the front runner in the Democratic primary to face Trump in the 2020 elections. So later Tuesday morning today, Trump went on Twitter to say he had ordered Sondland to be blocked. I would love to send Ambassador Sondland, a really good man and great American, to testify, but unfortunately he would be testifying before a totally compromised kangaroo court where Republicans' rights have been taken away and true facts are not allowed for the public to see, the president tweeted. Republicans are pushing for equal rights as the minority party to issue subpoenas, and the White House has said it will not respond to subpoenas until such rights are granted. And this is just an ongoing part of Trump's presidency, an ongoing part of this impeachment inquiry, where he seems willing to flaunt the fact that he's not going to participate in the process in a normal way. He's willing to be fairly open with the fact that he did do what he's accused of doing. And then he seems willing to do whatever he can to obstruct the inquiry and to make life difficult, to undermine the what is actually a perfectly legitimate constitutional process. His accusations that this is somehow a kangaroo court are the actions of somebody who just doesn't want to be held to account by a perfectly legitimate authority. That is the purpose of Congress, is to hold the other two branches to account. And the purpose of an impeachment is to hold the president to account. If the president is unwilling to participate in that process, my feeling is that he should probably be seen as a sign of guilt. But there we go. We will move on from that. I'm sure this story is going to continue probably throughout the next few months, if not the rest of next year. It's a complicated process. There is a lot of things in Donald Trump's behavior as president to look into that are potentially impeachable offenses. So this story could just run and run for a very long time. Back in the UK, Extinction Rebellion activists glue themselves to the Department for Transport and the Home Office. Extinction Rebellion activists have glued themselves to the Department for Transport and the lobby of the Home Office in another day of protests, with further action planned at other government department buildings as hundreds face arrest. About 200 protesters camped on the streets of central London on Tuesday on the second day of the campaign group's planned 2-week shutdown of the heart of the capital, in protest at the lack of action to tackle the climate crisis. Westminster Bridge, Lambeth Bridge, Trafalgar Square and Smithfield Market, as well as several roads in Westminster, were blockaded by activists on Monday, with a focus on the areas around Parliament in an attempt to force politicians to heed their warnings. And today, protesters who remained faced arrest after being issued with warnings by police. Under Section 14 notices, which were handed out to tents at about 7:30 a.m., the activists will be allowed to demonstrate in a specified location in Trafalgar Square. Those who do not comply with the order will be arrested, though many camping on the corner of Horseferry Road and Marsham Street near to the Home Office said they intended to stay. The Extinction Rebellion activists obviously have been fairly high profile. It's difficult to say what impact they have. This kind of civil disobedience is certainly makes an impact. Whether it changes minds is a different question. We would, of course, have to look ahead to see what impact these have. Police said that 152 arrests had been made, taking the total over the 2 days to a grand total of 471. So it's certainly a large protest, and we can only hope, I suppose, that politicians do start to take notice of just how serious the climate crisis is becoming. We've seen, of course, the climate strikes led by Greta Thunberg across the world. and these Extinction Rebellion protests, which are also growing in size and scale and impact on the rest of us. We certainly hope that politicians will wake up and start dealing with this crisis in a much more robust way. It does seem unlikely, however. The Prime Minister Boris Johnson has criticised the activists, dismissing them as uncooperative crusties who should stop blocking the streets of the capital with their heaving, hemp-smelling bivvies. The Prime Minister does have a penchant for extremely flowery language, rather less for adequately engaging with the people of his country. Back in Scotland, though, Police Scotland launches what is amazingly its first ever survey on policing of football. For the first time, Police Scotland is asking for views on how the National Police Force engages with Scottish football supporters and the wider public about football policing. This follows a recommendation made in the Independent Review of Football Policing in Scotland report, which was commissioned by Police Scotland last year. Chief Inspector Campbell Crawford, the head of Police Scotland's National Football Unit, said, "Getting views directly from supporters is extremely important and a real step forward for us. We are keen that people understand that our role at football is to support the event organiser, as well as understanding what people expect from us. We are transforming the way we communicate with Scotland's football supporters, and we now need as many of them as possible to take part in the survey. We also want to make sure that the communities who host football matches are involved. We know policing operations have an effect on them too." Chief Inspector Crawford continued, "All the feedback we receive will be analysed and will contribute directly to our new engagement strategy. This will ensure football supporters and communities are involved in the way we police football in future. We want everyone who goes to a football match anywhere in Scotland to enjoy it in a safe and secure environment. We believe that by building on the work already done to develop effective working relationships with football supporters and our communities, we can contribute to ensuring a positive experience for supporters attending matches, as well as those who live and work in areas which host football matches. I would encourage anyone who has an interest in football policing to complete the survey. We would appreciate your help." And we would also encourage that. We always encourage our viewers to participate in all these consultations. They affect all of us, particularly, as the report says, people who live in or near areas with football stadiums. This is obviously comes on the back of the reversal of the Offensive Behaviour at Football Act last year, and as well as a significant amount of distrust that was built up between the police and the supporters of certain clubs while the Offensive Behaviour at Football Act was in force. The Act itself, I thought, was a very good one, but its implementation caused a lot of problems for a lot of fans. And while the vast majority of people did support the Act, there were implementation problems, and we would like to see Police Scotland have a better handle on how the fans expect the police to behave around them. So this survey can be found at consult.scotland.police.uk/surveys/football-engagement/strategy. I imagine if you can't remember all that, you can just Google Police Scotland Football Engagement Strategy. With a bit of luck, that should bring it up. I'm sure we'll tweet out the link as well. Moving on again, the National Islands Plan progresses. This is Scotland's first ever National Islands Plan, which has been laid before Parliament for consideration today. The Islands Minister, Paul Wheelhouse, has set out that the proposed plan, which follows last year's historic Islands Scotland Act, has been laid before Parliament for 40 days, with a final version to be published soon after that period. The proposed plan follows an extensive consultation which saw more than 60 events and meetings being held on islands across Scotland and attended by almost 1,000 people of all ages and background. The connected online consultation also received over 400 responses. And Mr. Wheelhouse said, "Today marks an important step forward in the historic journey for our islands." Excuse me. A historic journey for our islands that began with the passing of the Islands Act last year. Since spring, we have visited 41 of Scotland's islands, engaged online and consulted with stakeholders with an interest in the islands of Scotland. I hope this unparalleled level of engagement with islanders and stakeholders is captured by the proposed National Islands Plan and that it reflects the priorities identified by the people who live and work on Scotland's islands. The plan and the objectives and commitments within it are only part of the answer. I now look forward to taking the plan forward and translating it into action. Through its development, Scotland is showing the rest of the world, as well as our island communities, that islands and islanders are very important to our nation and that their voices are strong. And that is excellent news. As we know, the islands are a big part of Scotland, both physically and culturally, if not always in population terms. And we really do need central government to drive support and backing for the islands if they're going to have a prosperous future. So we welcome that very much. And just finally, in other news that we welcome, a group of 29 Kintyre dairy farmers have today launched a bid and an associated crowdfunding campaign to save the Campbelltown Creamery, producers of the world-famous Mull of Kintyre cheddar. This week, these 29 farms in the area that have been making Mull of Kintyre cheddar since the 70s, and the creamery, which has been operating since 1923, these 29 farms, all modern, committed and family-owned, have launched their campaign to purchase the creamery and the Mull of Kintyre cheddar brand from the current owner's first milk. The group, the Mull of Kintyre Milk Supply Cooperative, will fund the purchase through use of a levy from every litre of milk produced, in addition to external funding which is currently being sought. A key element of the funding package will be today's launch of the crowdfunding campaign, which seeks to raise £50,000 towards the purchase. The group is encouraging the local community, foodies, suppliers, customers, businesses, and anyone with a love of cheese to contribute to the crowdfund. Further information can be found at www.crowdfunder.co.uk/MOKcheddar. And we would absolutely support this. Small local businesses owning and running the food system is exactly the kind of food system that we want. It's a big part of the Scotland Food and Drink Ambition in 2030, which the Scottish Government has published, is to get more local development, local ownership, and more development of local businesses controlling the food system. Thomas Cameron, local dairy farmer, said, "We are currently facing a huge and exciting opportunity with a clear mission to secure the future of the Campbelltown Creamery for the benefit of the Kintyre community. We will also be in a position to save a well-known brand and contribute to Scotland's reputation as a land of food and drink." The dairy farming sector in the Kintyre Peninsula contributes £3.2 million per annum to the local economy. In turn, when additional upstream impacts are considered, a further £2.55 million is added. The dairy sector in the area provides 117 jobs on farm and a further 49 indirectly across Kintyre. So this is a great opportunity, and again, we'll just ask you to support that if you can. If you do, as the report says, have a love of cheese, which I'm sure many of us do, www.crowdfunder.co.uk/MOKcheddar. Or if you just Google, again, crowdfunder Mull of Kintyre cheddar, I'm sure you'll find it. So we now come to another crowdfunder. Many of you, I'm sure, will have seen this already, but the excellent Phantom Power Films produced a short video to support their crowdfunder this week. So we'd just like to show that and encourage you to give Phantom Power a wee bit of support if you can. I do apologise for this. We are having a slight technical difficulty.
Independence is not a leap in the dark. We already have our own Scottish Parliament, Scottish legal system, Scottish education system, Scottish NHS, and soon a national investment bank. We have world-enviable thriving industries in food and drink, tourism, aerospace, creative, chemical and biotech, textiles, financial services, the largest oil and gas industry in the EU, and enormous potential in renewable energy. We have waiting for us our own place at the EU table. We'll be free from the baggage of Westminster's Brexit chaos, HS2 and Trident enforced debt, the unnecessary suffering of cruel and socially destructive austerity policies, terror-provoking foreign policies, governments we didn't vote for. Independence. It's not a leap in the dark. It's a small step through a door that's already open, a better future for Scotland. Decisions made by us, not for us.
And I mean, Phantom Power continually makes excellent films. He's a great asset to the movement. And as you saw at the end there are numerous ways to support independence, including joining parties, and of course supporting people like Broadcasting Scotland. We do this at the end of every show. I hate to do it. I hate begging for money, but does cost a lot of money to run a TV station like this. As small as we are, it does cost money. So we would ask you, if you can, to sign up and become a Broadcasting Scotland supporter at broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Your £5 a month will make a huge difference. And just to tell you again, we do have plans for more to cover more things. We are going to the SNP conference next week. We were also, of course, at the All Under One banner march on Saturday, live streaming all day. And I would just like to say very quickly a big hello to our viewers that I met there. A number of people approached me at the march, which is very strange, to tell me that they watched, to tell me that they enjoy the show. So a hello to all of you. I know you're watching. And again, just whatever you can do to support the movement, because this is not just about supporting us. This is about supporting everyone who's doing something to move the cause of independence in Scotland and the cause of the media in Scotland forward. Every little bit of support you can give makes a big difference. You might not realise it, but your £5 a month does make an enormous difference to what we can achieve here. So as always, just please, if you can support us, if you can support Phantom Power, if you can support anyone in the independence movement who's doing something to move things forward, your support is more valuable than you will ever realise. But that is all for tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. We will be back as always tomorrow, and we'll see you then. Thanks very much. Good night.